I, Councillor Vareth Ossa of the Lindari Accord, have witnessed many things in my 412 years of diplomatic service. I have watched the Keth delegation eat their own translator when negotiations broke down. I have seen a Meraki warlord cry, actual tears, because someone served him soup at the wrong temperature. I have stood in rooms where the fate of entire star systems was decided by a coin toss, because both parties were too tired to argue anymore. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day the humans brought their biology expert to the grand symposium on interspecies threat assessment. Her name was Mara Voss. She was 29 years old, according to her file. She had pale skin, dark brown hair cut just below her jaw, and green eyes that had a very specific quality to them. The quality of someone who knew exactly how much trouble they were about to cause, and had already decided it was worth it. She walked into the Accord's grand hall wearing a gray field jacket, brown boots, and a small smile that I immediately distrusted. My aide, a young Lindari named Tiv, leaned close to me and whispered, "She looks friendly." "Yes," I said, "that is precisely the problem. Now, let me explain the symposium, so you understand the full weight of what was about to happen. Every 40 years, the major species of the Accord gather to update the Interspecies Threat Index. It is a formal catalog. Each civilization submits data on the biological dangers native to their homeworld. The information is then ranked, classified, and stored in the Accord's central archives. It sounds boring. It is, in fact, usually incredibly boring. The Keth always present their fungal parasite. The Meraki always present their fire-scaled hound. The Tilva submit a 7-hour presentation about a plant. Yes, a plant that once killed a Tilva elder by falling on him. They have submitted this same presentation for 6 consecutive symposia. The plant is now extinct. They keep presenting anyway. Nobody protests. It is tradition. Then the humans joined the Accord, and tradition, apparently, is not something humans feel especially bound by. The Lindari were presenting first. We are a calm, structured people. Our skin is ash-gray. Our cheekbones carry faint silver ridges that catch light when we move, and we communicate with a precise formality that every other species finds either reassuring or insufferable, depending on who you ask. Our threat submission was a deep-sea predator from Lindar Prime, a large, armored creature, 600 kilograms, ambush hunter, very dangerous. We had 40 slides and a detailed anatomical breakdown. The hall appreciated it. Polite applause. The Meraki delegate, a broad-shouldered male named Borath, with copper-toned skin and small bone plates along his jaw, gave us a respectful nod. The Tilva clapped with all 4 of their fingers, which is their highest form of approval. Then it was the humans' turn. Mara Voss stood up, walked to the presentation podium, and placed her hands flat on the surface. No slides loaded. The screen behind her stayed blank. Tiv looked at me. I looked at Tiv. "Is her presentation file missing?" he whispered. "I believe," I said slowly, "that this is intentional." Mara looked out at the hall. 312 delegates from 26 species, all watching her. She smiled. "Okay," she said. "So, Earth's apex predator." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small device. She pointed it at the screen. A single image appeared. It was a photograph of a cat, a small orange cat, sitting on what appeared to be a soft cushion, looking at the camera with an expression of profound indifference. Complete silence fell over the grand hall of the Lindari Accord. Borath the Meraki leaned forward. His bone jaw plates shifted. "Is that a juvenile something?" "That," Mara said, "is Biscuit. He's 8 years old. He weighs 4.5 kilograms.
He once ate an entire roast chicken off my counter and then knocked my favorite mug onto the floor while looking directly at me.
She paused. He is not the apex predator. More silence. I just wanted you to meet him, she said. He's a good cat. I am going to be honest with you. At this point, I had already begun composing my formal complaint to the Human Accord Liaison Office in my head. Something about inappropriate use of symposium time and failure to meet submission standards. But then Mara clicked to the next slide, and I stopped. The image on the screen was not a cat. It was a wolf. Not a dramatic image, not a staged one. It was a photograph taken in what looked like a cold northern forest, gray sky above, snow on the ground. The wolf stood at the edge of the tree line, looking directly at the camera. It was large, dense fur, yellow eyes, and it held itself in a way that made you feel, very clearly, that it was deciding whether you were worth its time. This, Mara said, is Canis lupus, the gray wolf, 60 to 80 kilograms, pack hunter, capable of pursuing prey for 8 to 10 hours across dozens of kilometers without stopping. She clicked again. A bear. Brown, massive, photographed mid-stride through shallow water, mouth open slightly. Ursus arctos, brown bear, up to 700 kilograms, fast over short distances, exceptional memory. Will remember a threat for years. Click. A crocodile, half submerged in dark water, only its eyes and the ridge of its back visible. Crocodilus niloticus, the Nile crocodile, one of the most efficient ambush predators to ever exist on any world we have catalogued. 4,000 years ago, my ancestors built one of Earth's greatest civilizations on the banks of the river this animal also called home. She let that sit for a moment. They did not eliminate the crocodile. They learned to respect it. Barath made a low sound in his chest, not a threatening sound. The kind of sound that means, I am beginning to pay attention. You should know, Mara continued, that none of these animals are the apex predator either. The hall began to murmur. I noticed something, watching her. Mara Voss was not nervous. I have spent 4 centuries watching diplomats and representatives speak in front of large audiences. Almost all of them show some signal of stress, a shift in posture, a tightening around the eyes, a slight change in vocal pitch. Mara was completely, infuriatingly calm. She was also having fun. I could see it. The small pull at the corner of her mouth, the way she timed her pauses, letting the silence do work for her. She was performing, yes, but not out of anxiety. She was doing this because she genuinely enjoyed it. Humans, I have since learned, have a particular relationship with dramatic timing. They evolved it somewhere between learning to tell stories around fires and learning to build theater. It is either charming or deeply alarming, depending entirely on context. Before I get to the actual answer, Mara said, I want to give you some numbers. She clicked to a new slide. Text, this time. Simple, clean. Earth has approximately 8.7 million distinct species. Of those, roughly 5.5 million are insects. Insects have been on Earth for approximately 400 million years. They survived every mass extinction, every ice age, every comet. She paused. The planet also has sharks. Sharks have been around for 450 million years. They predate trees. Let me say that again. Sharks existed before trees did. Trees had not yet been invented when sharks were already swimming around, being sharks. A delegate from the Tilva delegation, a small, slight person with pale blue skin and tiny bioluminescent freckles across their cheeks, raised a nervous hand. Trees. came after? 450 million years of sharks, Mara confirmed. Trees showed up around 385 million years ago. So yes, for about 65 million years, sharks were already here, doing fine, while trees had not yet worked out how to exist. The Tilva delegate sat back down very slowly. And yet, Mara said, sharks are not the apex predator either. Tiv had stopped writing in his notes. He was just watching her. I considered telling him to refocus on his documentation duties. Then I decided I also was not writing notes anymore and let it go. There is an animal, Mara said, that humans call the honey badger. New image on the screen. A compact, low-slung creature with black and white coloring, small eyes, and an expression that could only be described as aggressively unimpressed. The honey badger does not care, Mara said simply. She gave that statement exactly the space it deserved. It attacks lion cubs. It survives venomous snake bites well enough to shake them off, sleep it off, and keep moving. It has been documented fighting off animals 5 times its size. It digs through solid ground. It breaks into beehives for food, not because it cannot feel the stings, but because it has decided that it does not care about the stings. Its skin is thick enough and loose enough that predators cannot get a proper grip on it, which means if something does catch it, the honey badger can often turn around inside its own skin and bite back. Silence. It weighs about 12 kilograms, Mara added. Borath made the sound again, louder this time. Still not the apex predator, Mara said, almost cheerfully. But I wanted you to know it exists, because Earth has a lot of things that are not the apex predator, and all of them are, individually, remarkable. She was building something. I recognized it finally, about 20 minutes in. She was not presenting data. She was constructing a feeling. She was laying one piece down after another, each one heavier than the last. And the shape it was forming was not a list of dangerous animals. It was context. She was making sure that by the time she answered the actual question, the answer would land correctly. I have been in diplomacy for 400 years. I have met perhaps 7 people in my life who could do that without formal training. Mara Voss was apparently doing it casually, in field boots, with a photograph of a cat as her opening slide. Okay, she said. Now we get to the part where I answer the question. The hall had gone genuinely quiet. Not polite quiet, actual quiet. The kind where everyone is holding their breath without deciding to. The question the symposium asks is, what is your world's apex predator? And I want to be very precise here, because the answer is interesting. She clicked off the last animal image. The screen went dark. Then she raised her right hand, just lifted it, slowly. Fingers relaxed, palm facing outward. She held it there. Nobody in the hall spoke. Us, she said. The answer is us. More silence, but different now, heavier. Homo sapiens. Anatomically modern humans have existed for approximately 300,000 years. In that time, we have driven dozens of megafauna species to extinction, not through biological superiority, but through sustained, coordinated, adaptive effort. We are not the fastest thing on Earth. We are not the strongest. We are not the largest. We do not have natural armor. We are not venomous. Our teeth are honestly embarrassing. A small ripple of uncertain sounds moved through the hall. But we are, she said, the most persistent thing on the planet. Humans learned a hunting technique called persistence hunting. We cannot outrun a deer. However, we can follow a deer, all day, through heat, through terrain, communicating with each other, taking turns, rotating who leads, not stopping, never stopping. until the deer, which is faster and stronger and better designed for this planet than we are, collapses from exhaustion. And then we walk up to it. She let her hand drop. We do not win by being the best. We win by not quitting. And then we invented tools and language and coordinated society and agriculture and medicine and industry and spaceflight. And we showed up here, and I am standing at your podium, and every single animal I just showed you is still alive, because we decided we wanted it to stay alive. The silence in the grand hall had a texture to it now, something I could not name exactly. We are the apex predator of Earth, Mara said, not because everything else is gone, because everything else is still there, and we chose that. She picked up her small device from the podium. That concludes Earth's submission. She walked back to the human delegation's table, sat down, and picked up her drink like she had just finished reading a grocery list. Nobody applauded immediately. For approximately 3 seconds, 312 delegates sat in total silence. Then Borath of the Meraki, who had submitted last symposium that his species' most dangerous predator was a creature that could bite through solid metal, put both hands flat on the table in front of him, looked at the human woman now calmly sipping her drink, and said, quietly but clearly enough for the whole hall to hear, "You chose that." Mara looked up, met his eyes. "Yeah," she said. Borath sat back slowly. I looked at Tiv. Tiv looked at me. His silver facial ridges had gone pale in the way they do when he is genuinely unsettled. "Counselor," he whispered. "Yes," I said. She raised her hand. "Yes, Tiv." She raised her hand to indicate that the human was the apex predator. "Yes." And then she sat down and picked up her drink. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I think I need to reclassify something in our threat index," he said. "Write it up when we return to the office," I told him. And for the first time in 400 years of diplomatic service, I was not entirely sure what category to put it in. The symposium recessed for 1 standard hour after Mara Voss sat down. This was not scheduled. The recess was called by Senior Coordinator Felin of the Tilva, who stood up, said, "I need to process," in a very small voice, and walked directly to the refreshment area without waiting for formal acknowledgement. Since Felin had been coordinating symposia for 60 years and had never once called an unscheduled recess, nobody argued. 312 delegates quietly followed him to the refreshment area. I found myself standing near a window overlooking the Accord's eastern gardens, holding a cup of something warm that Tiv had pressed into my hands without explanation, watching the humans at the far end of the room. There were 4 of them in the delegation. Mara Voss, relaxed and apparently unbothered. A tall, broad-shouldered man named Dario Kell, who had copper-brown skin, close-cut dark hair, and the kind of quiet stillness that usually means either a very calm person or a very patient one. A younger woman, Priya Saleh, sharp-faced and quick-eyed, who had been taking notes on a small device throughout Mara's presentation with an expression of total concentration. And an older man, white-haired and lean, named Counselor Fen Hartley, who was the official human diplomatic lead and who had said almost nothing all morning, which I now suspected was entirely deliberate. They were talking quietly among themselves. Mara said something. Dario laughed. Priya shook her head, but smiled. Hartley sipped his drink and looked serenely out at the garden like a man who had planned all of this from the beginning and found the results satisfying. I decided I needed to speak with them. Specifically, I decided I needed to speak with her. Mara saw me coming. She had the particular quality of someone who always sees things coming, but chooses when to acknowledge them. She waited until I was 2 steps away, then turned fully and gave me a small, polite nod. "Counselor Ossa," she said. "Ms. Voss," I replied, "your presentation was unusual." "Thank you? That was not entirely a compliment." "I know," she said pleasantly, "but I'm taking it as one." I studied her for a moment. Up close, those green eyes had a quality I had not noticed from across the hall. Not mischief exactly. More like the look of someone who had thought about something very carefully, from many angles, and had arrived at a conclusion they were completely comfortable with. "The honey badger," I said. "Yes? Was that necessary?" She considered this with what appeared to be genuine seriousness. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes. You cannot understand the context of the answer without understanding the texture of the planet first. Earth is not a place where one dangerous thing exists and everything else is soft. It is a place where everything, at some level, is competing with everything else. The honey badger is important because it illustrates that survival on Earth is not about being the biggest. It is about having a specific and absolute commitment to continuing to exist." I looked at her. "And humans have that quality." "Humans invented that quality," she said, "and then wrote songs about it, and painted it on cave walls, and turned it into mythology. And then, eventually, built rockets." She said it without arrogance. That was the part that stayed with me. A boast delivered with arrogance is easy to dismiss. Mara Voss was not boasting. She was stating facts with the calm certainty of someone describing weather. Dario Kell had drifted over during this exchange. He was even larger up close, though he moved quietly. He extended a hand toward me in the human greeting gesture, and I shook it, which took a small effort of will because human hand-gripping is more firm than Lindari custom, and he was very strong. "Sorry if the presentation threw people," he said. His voice was low, easy, the kind of voice that makes you feel like you are in the middle of a comfortable conversation, even when you have just met. "It did not throw people," I said, which was a polite lie. He smiled. He knew it was a polite lie. "Mara has a style," he said. I noticed. She spent 4 years doing field research in some of the most biologically active regions on Earth, he said. Madagascar, the Amazon basin, the Siberian tundra. She has been charged by a rhinoceros, bitten by something she described as medium-sized but committed, and once had to sit very still for 6 hours in a marsh because a territorial bird had decided she was a threat and was not leaving. He paused. She came back from that posting with better field notes than anyone in the program's history, and a personal philosophy about the nature of persistence, which she then delivered to 300 delegates without slides, I said. She had one slide, he said. Biscuit. The cat. The cat, he confirmed, with the expression of someone who has had this conversation before and will have it again. The recess ended. The delegates returned to their seats. The symposium continued. The Muraki presented their metal-biting creature. It was large, aggressive, and anatomically impressive. Normally, Borath's presentation commanded the room completely. Today, people kept glancing at the human delegation. Not obviously, not rudely. The way you glance at something that has changed the way you are reading the rest of the room. The Keth presented their fungal parasite. Detailed. Genuinely disturbing. Also somewhat overshadowed. When the Tilva stood to begin their 7-hour plant presentation, Senior Coordinator Felon quietly indicated that they could perhaps summarize. The Tilva representative, a young person with bioluminescent freckles, who had clearly been waiting their whole career to deliver this full presentation, looked devastated. Felon mouthed the word later, sympathetically. Then came the open discussion portion of the symposium. This is where representatives may ask questions of other delegations regarding their submissions. It is usually very polite, very formal. 3 or 4 questions, standard clarifications, brief answers, move on. Borath of the Meraki stood first. He looked directly at the human delegation. "I have a question," he said, "for the human representative." Mara stood. "Yes, Delegate Borath. You said that humans chose to preserve the other species on your world," he said, "after becoming the apex predator. You chose not to eliminate your competitors." "That's correct." He was quiet for a moment. His bone jaw plates shifted slowly, the way they do when a Meraki is thinking through something carefully. "My species," he said, "did not make that choice." The room went very still. 30,000 years ago, he continued, there were 2 other large predator species on our world that competed with us in the same ecological space. We eliminated them, both of them. Within 6,000 years of developing coordinated hunting, he paused. At the time, it seemed like the logical conclusion to a competition. Mara looked at him steadily. "And now?" "Now I am looking at a species that did not eliminate its competitors," he said, "and somehow arrived at the same destination we did. Spaceflight, civilization, this hall." He spread one hand flat on the table. "And I am wondering if perhaps the competition was not the point?" The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the particular silence of a thought that has just become larger than the room expected. Mara nodded slowly. "We almost made the same choice," she said. "Humans drove a lot of species extinct before we understood what we were doing. We are still working to undo some of that damage." She paused. "The difference, I think, is that we developed the capacity to look at what we had done and feel something about it. Regret. Responsibility. And then we built institutions and laws around that feeling." Borath was quiet for a long moment. "Humans feel responsibility," he said. "Not a question. A statement being tested. Constantly," Mara said. "It is, honestly, exhausting." A ripple of uncertain sound moved through the hall. It took me a moment to identify it. It was laughter. Not all species laughed the same way. Lindari do a kind of low-resonant exhale. Meraki clicked their back teeth. Tilva produce a high, fluting sound. Keth make no audible sound at all, but their chest plates briefly illuminate. Every single one of those sounds happened in that room, at the same time, in response to a human saying the word exhausting. Borath himself made his clicking sound. He sat back down, and something in his posture had shifted. Not softer exactly. More considered. Priya Saleh, the sharp-faced younger woman from the human delegation, had been speaking quietly to Hartley during this exchange. When Borath sat down, she leaned toward Mara and said something too low for me to hear. Mara listened, then nodded, and stood again. "If I may," she said to the room, "my colleague has a point she would like to add, if the symposium permits." Felon, who was still visibly processing the earlier part of the session, nodded agreement from the coordinator's chair. Priya stood. She was younger than Mara, maybe 24, and had the rapid, precise energy of someone who processes information very fast and has strong opinions about what to do with it. "I work in Earth's interspecies conservation programs," she said. "Not alien species, Earth species, the ones we almost lost." She pulled up a new image on the screen, and it was a photograph so different from the wolf and the bear and the crocodile that the whole hall seemed to take a breath. It was a small bird, bright yellow, sitting on a branch over a river, catching the light. "This is a regent honey eater," Priya said. 40 years ago, there were fewer than 300 left on Earth. Today, there are over 4,000. She clicked to another image. A large marine animal breaching the surface of dark water, spray catching the light. Humpback whale, near extinction in the 20th century. Current population, over 80,000. She looked out at the hall. "We did that," she said simply. "Not because these species were useful to us. Not because they posed a threat. Because someone noticed they were disappearing. And that felt wrong. And we decided to fix it." She sat down. I noticed that the young Tilva delegate with the bioluminescent freckles had both hands pressed flat over their chest, which is a Tilva gesture I had to look up later. It means something close to, "This is affecting me in a way I did not anticipate." The formal session ended 2 hours later. The symposium's closing record, which I reviewed that evening in my office with Tiv and a very large cup of something I needed, listed Earth's official apex predator submission as Homo sapiens, with supplementary notation regarding persistence hunting, cooperative social structure, ecological stewardship capacity, and one mention of the honey badger for contextual purposes. It was the first submission in the symposium's 400-year history to receive a formal addendum from another delegation. Borath of the Meraki submitted a 3-paragraph note requesting that the human presentation be included in Meraki educational archives. Felon of the Tilva submitted a request to schedule a follow-up session on human conservation methodology. The Keth submitted nothing, but one of their delegates stood outside the hall for 40 minutes after the session ended, looking at nothing in particular, which for a Keth is apparently the equivalent of having a very long, serious conversation with yourself. That evening, a smaller gathering formed in the Accord's reception hall. Informal. Food, drinks, the kind of quiet conversation that happens after a long day of formal proceedings. I found Hartley near the window where I had stood during the recess. He was looking at the garden, which was now lit by the Accord's exterior lights, the evening sky above it beginning to shift toward dark. "Your delegation made an impression today," I said. He smiled, a comfortable smile, well-worn. "Mara tends to do that." "You planned the presentation the way it was delivered," I said. Not a question. He looked at me sideways. "Mara planned the presentation. I approved it. There is a difference." "Did you hesitate to approve it?" He considered this honestly. "For about 30 seconds, he said. Then I thought about who was going to be in that room, what they expected, and what they actually needed to understand." He glanced toward where Mara stood across the room, now deep in conversation with the young Tilva delegate, both of them gesturing at something on Priya's small device. "She has a gift for identifying what the moment actually requires," he said, "even when the moment thinks it wants something else." I watched Mara for a moment. She had pulled up what appeared to be a video, and the Tilva delegate's freckles were flickering with excitement. Dario had joined them and was explaining something with his hands. The conversation had the warm, easy energy of people who have just discovered they have more in common than they expected. "She raised her hand," I said, mostly to myself. Hartley heard me anyway. She did. In a hall of 300 delegates, representing species with interstellar travel and centuries of diplomatic protocol, she answered the question of what Earth's apex predator was by raising her own hand. "It is the most accurate answer," he said. "It was also," I said carefully, "the most effective possible way to make 300 diplomats feel the weight of that answer." He nodded, said nothing. "She knew that," I said. He smiled again. "She's human," he said. "We have been figuring out how to tell stories that make people feel the truth of something since before we had written language. It is arguably our oldest skill." He looked back out at the garden. Older than tools, he said. Older than farming. Possibly older than fire. A pause. The honey badger does not tell stories. The crocodile does not tell stories. The wolf communicates, cooperates, hunts with extraordinary efficiency. He tilted his head slightly. But it does not stand in front of 300 people and make them understand something they did not know they needed to understand. He sipped his drink. That, he said quietly, is what we are. I returned to my office late that evening. Tiv had already gone home. The building was quiet. The symposium documentation was waiting on my desk. Forms, classifications, index updates, all the formal weight of what had been said and shown and recorded. I sat down, looked at the form marked Earth Submission, Apex Predator Classification. In the field marked Primary Threat Classification, I had to enter a category. The standard options were Physical Predator, Environmental Hazard, Chemical Biological, Behavioral Complex, Other. I sat with the form for a long time. Then I selected Behavioral Complex, and in the Notes field I wrote, See Supplementary File. Pay particular attention to persistence hunting. Also note conservation data. Also note the cat. I paused. I added one more line. Recommend all Accord diplomatic staff review this submission before any future engagement with human representatives. Not because humans are a threat, because understanding what they are matters more than categorizing what they could become. I submitted the form. Then I sat back in my chair, looked out my office window at the dark garden below, and thought about a woman in gray field boots raising her hand in a hall full of interstellar diplomats. And I thought about the fact that on her world, at this very moment, somewhere, a honey badger was doing exactly what it always did. Not caring, not stopping, just continuing to exist with a specific, absolute commitment that no one had ever managed to fully explain. And somewhere else on that same world, a small orange cat named Biscuit was probably asleep on a cushion, entirely unbothered by the fact that the creature who chose to keep him fed and warm was, technically, the most persistently effective apex predator in the biological history of their shared